Hello, I'm the Daily Storyteller, and I'm here to keep you company today. If you've visited my channel before, welcome back. And if this is your first time, I'm so glad to welcome you to the world of stories. I know many of you use these videos to relax or to help fall asleep more easily. So get comfortable, let your body relax, and allow the gentle sound of rain in the background to wash away your stress and worries. In this video, you'll hear chilling stories, most of them based on true events, told with honesty and depth. If you enjoy this content, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Now then, let's begin. The night hung low and thick over Hollow Creek, a suffocating veil of fog curling through the skeletal trees and dead leaves. Ethan's lantern flickered weakly, struggling against the damp chill that crept into his bones with every hesitant step he took. The path beneath his feet was muddied and uneven, littered with twigs that snapped like brittle bones underfoot. Ahead, the ruins of Hollow Church rose like a corpse frozen in time. Its once proud steeple was shattered and leaning, stained glass windows cracked and missing like empty eye sockets staring into oblivion. The air around the church was heavy, a palpable silence so profound it pressed against Ethan's chest and squeezed. Locals whispered dark tales about this place. Stories of curses, hauntings, and souls trapped forever between the worlds of the living and the dead. Ethan had dismissed such tales for years, but tonight, standing before the desecrated threshold, he could feel the weight of those stories pressing down on him like an unseen hand. He hesitated before pushing open the iron gate, its rusty hinges groaning an eerie lament into the night. The graveyard sprawled before him, an overgrown tangle of crumbling tombstones leaning at unnatural angles. Moss choked the engravings, erasing names and dates, swallowing history in slow decay. Each step forward echoed against the shattered stones. Ethan's breath puffed in the cold air, his heartbeat thundering louder than the whispering wind. It felt as if unseen eyes watched him from the shadows, silent, hungry. The heavy wooden doors of the church stood ajar, inviting and forbidding. Taking a steadying breath, Ethan crossed the threshold into darkness. Inside, the stale air tasted of mold and forgotten prayers. Pews were overturned, their splintered wood like broken bones scattered across the stone floor. The altar, once the sacred heart of worship, was now draped in cobwebs thick enough to catch the slightest touch. Faded frescoes, their colors muted and peeling, lined the walls. Faded witnesses to a vanished faith. As Ethan's lantern cast trembling light, the silence within the church grew unnerving. From the corners of the room, faint whispers began to creep, curling around him like smoke drifting through cold air. "Leave! Leave!" the voices hissed, so soft at first he almost convinced himself it was the wind. But they grew louder, overlapping murmurs in a language half-remembered, ancient and broken. A chill ran down Ethan's spine, a deep, primal warning urging flight, yet his feet remained rooted. There was something here, something desperate. A sudden slam echoed through the sanctuary as the main doors behind him thudded shut, sending a shockwave of cold terror crashing into his chest. The lantern flickered violently, casting the walls into twisting shadows. From the gloom, ethereal figures emerged, ghostly shapes, translucent and flickering like candle flames. Their eyes were hollow pits of sorrow. Their mouths moved in silent screams that echoed in Ethan's mind like tortured prayers.
Who are you?"
he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of dread. Bound, cursed, forgotten. A chorus of voices breathed, as if the church itself exhaled its pain. Ethan's breath crystallized in the icy air. His fingers trembled as he gripped the lantern tighter. "I don't belong here," he muttered, voice shaking. But the church refused to release him. The whispers became wails, rising to a deafening crescendo that pierced the silence of the night. Suddenly, the air shifted, thickened with malevolence. Ethan felt an icy hand close around his shoulder, cold and heavy as death itself. He spun around, heart hammering, but no one was there. From the darkness, the voice came again, now low and dreadful. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as he spun, desperate to find the source of the chilling touch. The church around him seemed to breathe, walls narrowing, shadows thickening, the air pulsating with a dark, ancient hunger. His lantern flickered wildly, casting fractured light that revealed more of the spectral congregation now filling the pews. Their faces, gaunt and hollow, twisted in eternal torment. Eyes once full of life, now glazed with endless sorrow, mouths moving in a silent litany of despair. A cold dread settled over Ethan like a shroud, freezing his limbs. Yet, beneath the terror, a spark of resolve ignited. He could not become another lost soul trapped in this forsaken place. He took a tentative step backward, then another, retreating toward the broken altar. The wood beneath his feet groaned, threatening to betray his presence to whatever haunted these ruins. Suddenly, from the shadows behind the altar, a figure emerged. Tall, cloaked in tattered black robes, face obscured by a hood. The temperature plunged further, breath visible in the air as the figure's presence sucked the warmth from the room. Ethan's throat tightened. What are you?" he stammered. The figure's voice was a rasp, scraping like dry leaves across stone. "I am the keeper of Hollow's secret," it whispered, "bound to this cursed sanctuary until the last prayer is heard, the last soul freed or consumed." A flicker of movement caught Ethan's eye. Symbols carved into the altar's cracked surface, ancient runes pulsing faintly with an otherworldly glow. "You've come seeking answers," the figure continued, "but beware, some truths devour the very light that seeks them." Ethan swallowed his fear, stepping closer despite the cold clutch on his heart. What happened here? Why are these souls trapped? The figure extended a pale, skeletal hand toward the altar. Long ago, a blasphemy severed this sacred ground from salvation. A dark pact forged in blood and despair. The church became a prison, a hollow for the damned. Suddenly, a cacophony erupted. The wailing spirits surged forward, a whirlwind of anguish and fury. Ethan staggered, lantern nearly snuffed by the onslaught of cold. He fell to his knees, gripping the altar edge as spectral hands clawed at his mind. Whispered secrets, forbidden and terrible, flooded his thoughts. The keeper intoned over the chaos, "Only the one who dares to face the curse, who walks willingly into the abyss, can break the chains." Ethan's vision blurred. The church walls seemed to dissolve into endless night. Voices, twisted and mournful, echoed endlessly. No forgiveness, no escape. He clenched his eyes shut, a desperate prayer burning on his lips. When he dared to open them again, the figure was gone, the spirits fading into silence. Yet the cold remained, and the altar's runes glowed faintly beneath his trembling hand. A single thought echoed through Ethan's mind. To escape, he must unravel the curse. But doing so meant confronting the darkness that had consumed Hollow Church for centuries. The Black Rock Chapel sat isolated atop the jagged cliffs overlooking the restless sea, a silhouette of decayed faith against the turbulent sky. For centuries, its once majestic spires had pierced the heavens, but now time and neglect had transformed it into a crumbling mausoleum of forgotten prayers and whispered horrors. Father Caraway, a man weathered by years of faith and sorrow, stood at the chapel's threshold. His breath was shallow, heavy with the weight of unseen dread. Rumors of a curse had followed the chapel like a shadow, stories told in hushed tones of unnatural deaths, vanishing parishioners, and a darkness that consumed the light. Yet tonight, duty had brought him here, drawn by a summons penned in trembling hand and stained with fear. The villagers' desperation was palpable. They pleaded for deliverance from an evil that no prayer seemed to abate. As he stepped inside, the air thickened, saturated with the scent of damp stone and stale incense. The pews were empty, save for the dust motes dancing in the thin shafts of moonlight filtering through shattered windows. A silence, heavy and oppressive, blanketed the nave. The flicker of his candle cast grotesque shadows that writhed along the cracked walls, as if the chapel itself breathed a sinister breath. In the confessional booth, a figure waited, a youth, pale and trembling, eyes wide with terror. His voice, when it broke the silence, was barely more than a whisper. "Father, I have seen what dwells beneath this holy ground." Father Caraway felt a chill. "Speak, child." "The chapel. It is not as it seems," the boy said, shuddering. "Beneath the altar lies a darkness, ancient and hungry. It calls to us, claiming souls in the dead of night." Before the priest could respond, a sudden crash echoed from the bell tower. The chapel seemed to pulse with malevolence, shadows twisting unnaturally. The boy gasped, clutching his chest, as if the very air conspired to suffocate him. Father Caraway moved toward the bell tower, each step a battle against the creeping fear that threatened to unravel his faith. The wooden stairs groaned beneath his weight, the walls whispering secrets older than time. At the tower's peak, he found the source of the disturbance, a shattered bell, swinging wildly despite the still air. And beneath it, a chilling sight, a woman's lifeless body suspended by a rope, eyes staring wide with eternal accusation. Caraway's heart pounded as cold dread seeped into his bones. The curse was no mere superstition. It was alive, hungry, and waiting. Father Caraway's breath caught in his throat as he stared down at the lifeless body suspended beneath the shattered bell. The woman's skin was ghostly pale, veins standing out like twisted roots beneath the thin flesh, and her eyes, those hollow eyes, were locked forever in a gaze of accusation and despair. The rope creaked softly in the still air, its slow sway like the pendulum of a death sentence that had long ago passed. The chill that gripped Caraway was not merely the cold night air seeping through broken windows. It was something older, heavier, a weight that pressed on his soul and threatened to crush the last embers of his faith. His fingers trembled, tightening around the worn wood of his rosary as the scent of decay and old blood assaulted his senses. The church, this cursed sanctuary, felt alive with malevolence. Stone walls seemed to breathe, the cracks between bricks widening imperceptibly, as though the chapel itself were awakening from a centuries-long nightmare. Shadows flickered and twisted at the edge of his vision, coalescing into forms that vanished when met with the harsh light of his candle. From the depths below, an almost imperceptible vibration shuddered through the floor. A low, guttural growl echoed faintly, rising slowly like a tide. Father Carraway's heart thundered in his chest, his mind racing. He forced himself to take a step back from the ghastly scene, every instinct screaming to flee, yet duty chained him in place. The boy from the confessional appeared suddenly in the doorway, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Father, it's coming," he gasped. "The darkness beneath the chapel, it stirs." Carraway swallowed hard and nodded grimly. "Then we face it, together." His voice was steady, though his soul trembled like a candle flame in the wind. The boy's eyes darted nervously. "But it's not like anything you've seen before. It's hungry. It's alive." Carraway took a deep breath, clenching the crucifix hanging from his neck. "Faith will be our shield." Together they turned to the altar, its surface etched with ancient runes, pulsating faintly with an eerie green glow. Carraway traced the carvings with trembling fingers, whispering prayers passed down through generations, words meant to bind evil and restore sanctity. But the ground beneath them trembled suddenly, violent and insistent. The walls groaned as if the very stones were cracking open, revealing something far worse than decay, an abyss yawning beneath the chapel floor. From the dark fissure erupted tendrils of shadow, writhing like serpents of living darkness. They slithered upward, pulsating with malevolent life, eager to reclaim the world above. Carraway raised his voice, chanting fervently, "In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti." The shadows hissed and recoiled briefly, but surged again with renewed ferocity. The boy screamed as one tendril lashed out, passing through him like smoke, chilling him to the bone. Carraway lunged forward, grabbing the boy and pulling him to safety as the chapel filled with unearthly screams and the sound of stone grinding against stone. Time lost meaning as Father Carraway fought not just for survival, but for the souls bound to this cursed place. The tendrils lashed and twisted, enveloping the altar, the pews, the very air with their suffocating darkness. He saw faces, twisted, anguished, human yet not, emerge from the shadows. Prisoners of the curse, forever trapped, their eyes pleading for release, yet consumed by madness. Carraway's prayers grew louder, desperate, his voice raw and cracked. "Sancte Michael Arcangele, defende nos in proelio." The air shimmered briefly with holy light, forcing the darkness to retreat, but only for a moment. Suddenly, the altar shattered, the runes dissolving into ash. The abyss below swallowed the faint glow, and the tendrils surged once more, stronger, more vicious. The boy's hand slipped from Carraway's grasp as a shadow coiled around his ankle, dragging him toward the void. Carraway lunged, grabbing the boy just in time, pulling him back into the failing light. Breathless, shaken, Carraway knew the battle was far from over. The curse was no mere legend, it was a living nightmare, and Hollow Chapel was its prison. As dawn threatened the horizon, Father Carraway made a vow to uncover the chapel's darkest secret and to end the curse, even if it meant facing the abyss itself. The wind screamed through the skeletal remains of Ravenwood Asylum, tearing at broken windows and rattling rusted doors like the wails of tortured souls trapped inside. Moonlight struggled to pierce the heavy blanket of fog that clung to the abandoned building, casting twisted shadows that danced across crumbling walls and shattered glass. Detective Clara Hayes stepped carefully over piles of debris strewn across the corridor floor. Each footfall stirred clouds of dust that hung in the stagnant air like ghostly veils. Her flashlight cut a trembling path ahead, its weak glow illuminating peeling wallpaper stained with time and neglect, faded signs warning of wards long shuttered and the rusted remnants of medical equipment abandoned in haste. She shivered, more from the oppressive atmosphere than the chill. The stories she had heard were chilling enough, tales of unexplained disappearances, sudden madness, and whispers echoing through the night. Yet nothing prepared her for the palpable weight pressing down inside these walls. A heaviness that seemed to suck the warmth from her body and the hope from her heart. As she ventured deeper, the air thickened, growing colder and heavier with every step. Her breath fogged in the beam of her flashlight, steady but faint as a candle flicker in a tempest. The silence was broken only by the occasional drip of water from a leaky pipe, a sound that echoed like distant footsteps, or perhaps something far more sinister. She paused before a heavy steel door, its paint chipped and blistered, the faded words, "Isolation Ward," barely legible. Beyond lay a long-abandoned section of the asylum where the most disturbed patients had once been confined, many never to leave. Her hand trembled as she pushed the door open. The hinges groaned a rusty protest, revealing a room swallowed by darkness, the air thick with the stale breath of decades. Rusted beds stood like tombstones, and twisted restraints hung from the walls like skeletal hands frozen in torment. From somewhere deep within the shadows came a faint murmur, indistinct but laden with desperation. Clara's pulse quickened. She strained to listen, but the sounds vanished like mist. Shaking off the chill crawling up her spine, she pressed onward through the labyrinthine corridors. The walls seemed to close in, the fading light casting grotesque shapes that flickered and twisted at the edge of her vision. The once sterile white tiles were cracked and stained, and the flickering fluorescence overhead buzzed like angry spirits. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered violently, then died, plunging her into a darkness so complete it felt suffocating. Clara's breath hitched as her eyes struggled to adjust. Heart pounding, she fumbled with the flashlight, slamming it against her palm before the beam sputtered back to life. In that brief moment of blackout, she had glimpsed something, movement just beyond the reach of the light, a shadow that wasn't cast by any object, a figure. Or something else. Her skin prickled with the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Gathering her courage, Clara moved toward the stairwell leading down to the asylum's basement. The stairs groaned beneath her weight, each creak a reminder of the building's decay and its dark past. The air grew colder still, the scent of mold and rot giving way to something fouler, more ancient. The basement was a place the staff rarely mentioned, an underworld of cells and tunnels that housed secrets buried with screams long forgotten. Clara's flashlight revealed peeling paint, wet stone walls slick with moisture, and rusted chains dangling from heavy shackles. From the depths below, she heard it again, a low, sorrowful whisper, threading through the silence like a siren's call. Her heart clenched in a painful rhythm as she descended further, drawn inexorably toward the source. In the corner of the subterranean chamber, a faint glow pulsed, an unnatural, sickly green light emanating from a cracked tile on the floor. As Clara knelt to examine it, the air shifted violently, and the whispers rose into a cacophony of voices, overlapping in a maddening symphony of grief and rage. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath her, and a fissure cracked open, revealing a yawning abyss. From its depths surged tendrils of living shadow, twisting and writhing like serpents, hungry for flesh and soul. Clara scrambled backward, terror rooting her feet as the darkness slithered closer, its hunger palpable, its touch icy and corrupting. She clutched her rosary tightly, murmuring prayers against the encroaching nightmare. The asylum was alive, and it hungered. The shadows that clawed their way from the abyss below Ravenwood's basement were no mere trick of the mind. They writhed and slithered, tendrils of living darkness seeking to smother every trace of light and hope that dared intrude upon their forsaken domain. Detective Clara Hayes stumbled backward, heart pounding wildly as the cold tendrils brushed past her skin, leaving a numbness that spread like poison. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each wordless prayer mingling with the suffocating silence that had fallen. The ancient whispers twisted into agonized screams, echoing through the stone corridors with an unbearable intensity. Faces, pale, distorted, and etched with torment, emerged fleetingly from the inky mass. Their eyes pleaded with Clara, beseeching release from a fate worse than death. Compelled by a mixture of terror and resolve, Clara forced herself to stand, gripping the tarnished rosary hanging from her neck. She recalled the prayers her grandmother once taught her, words of protection, of light-piercing darkness. "In nomine Patris," she whispered, voice trembling. The tendrils recoiled momentarily, a hiss like a serpent's warning vibrating in the stale air. Seizing the moment, Clara stepped forward, following the green glow that pulsed steadily from the cracked tile. As she reached the altar of this subterranean crypt, she discovered an ancient relic embedded in the stone floor, a jagged, rune-inscribed shard emanating the eerie light. Its power was palpable, radiating a malevolent force that twisted the very fabric of reality. Her fingers brushed the shard's surface, and a cold shock shot through her arm. Visions flooded her mind, images of anguished souls, a cult's blood sacrifice, and the unholy pact forged to bind an ancient evil beneath the asylum's walls. A voice whispered from the darkness, simultaneously seductive and cruel. "You seek the truth, but the truth consumes." Clara staggered, fighting against the visions threatening to drown her sanity. She forced her eyes open, steeling herself against the overwhelming despair. Suddenly, a figure appeared from the shadows, a man, gaunt and hollow-eyed, clad in tattered remnants of an asylum uniform. His lips curled into a ghastly smile as he reached toward her, fingers twisted like gnarled roots. "You cannot save them," he murmured, voice rasping like dry leaves. "We are bound eternally." Clara recoiled, clutching the shard. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with decay and madness. Desperation surged through her veins as she realized the asylum was more than a building. It was a prison, and she was its latest captive. Summoning her last strength, Clara recited the ancient exorcism rites she had studied, her voice rising in defiance. The relic pulsed violently, the shadows shrieking in fury as the darkness recoiled. But as dawn's first light crept through the broken windows, the shadows vanished, only to whisper promises of return, lingering like a curse that would never be broken. Clara knew her battle was only beginning. The sun had long dipped beneath the jagged horizon, casting Widow's Peak into a shroud of twilight shadows. The sky was a swirling canvas of bruised purples and smoky greys, heavy clouds roiling as if stirred by some restless spirit. The sea below thrashed against the rocks in furious waves, sending salty spray that mingled with the creeping fog to cloak the cliffside in a ghostly veil. Emily's boots crunched on the gravel path, winding its lonely way up to the lighthouse, perched precariously at the cliff's edge. The air was thick with the scent of brine and moss, the cold wind biting through her coat as she tightened it around her. Despite the biting chill, a strange warmth flickered in her chest, a mixture of dread and determination as she approached the towering structure. The lighthouse had stood sentinel for over a century, its weathered stones scarred by storms and time. Its once brilliant beacon now extinguished, the ironwork of the lantern room was rusted and twisted, casting skeletal shadows that clawed at the fog. Stories whispered among the coastal villagers spoke of the widow who had once lived here, a woman consumed by grief and madness, lost to the cruel sea and the merciless cliffs. Emily had never been one to believe in tales of ghosts and curses. Yet the letter she found tucked inside her late grandmother's journal, cryptic and urgent, had drawn her here. "Find the truth at Widow's Peak," it had read, "before the past claims another soul." As she reached the heavy oak door, swollen from years of salt and rain, Emily hesitated. Her fingers brushed the cold iron handle, its chills searing through her gloves like a warning. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open. It moaned a mournful welcome, revealing a dark vestibule thick with dust and silence. Inside, the lighthouse was a cavern of shadows and echoes. Broken furniture lay strewn about, the remnants of a caretaker's life long abandoned. The walls, once painted a cheerful white, were now mottled with peeling plaster and creeping mold. Frayed curtains fluttered listlessly in the breeze that sneaked through shattered windows. Emily's flashlight beam danced over faded photographs pinned to a corkboard, images of a young woman with sorrowful eyes standing beside a man in a naval uniform. Nautical charts and faded letters littered a desk, yellowed with age. As she scanned the room, the temperature dropped sharply, a sudden chill creeping up her spine. A soft sound brushed past her ear, a faint sobbing carried on the wind like a lament from the deep. She froze, heart pounding. "Hello?" she called, voice barely more than a whisper. The silence swallowed her words. Steeling herself, Emily moved toward the spiral staircase that curled upward like a twisted serpent. Each step creaked underfoot, the sound unnerving in the heavy stillness. As she ascended, the sobbing grew louder, more distinct. A woman's voice, broken and filled with despair. At the top, the lantern room awaited, a skeletal cage of rusted beams and shattered glass. Moonlight spilled through the gaping holes, illuminating the swirling fog below like a sea of ghosts. The wind whipped fiercely, tugging at Emily's hair and clothes as she stepped to the edge. Then she saw her. A figure, pale and translucent, floated just beyond the glass. The woman wore a flowing white dress that billowed as if underwater. Her hair was a tangled halo of silver strands, and her eyes, empty wells of infinite sorrow, locked onto Emily with a haunting intensity. Emily's breath caught. The apparition lifted a trembling hand, beckoning silently toward the heart of the lighthouse. Drawn as if by a spell, Emily followed, descending a narrow passageway that led to a small chamber filled with relics and memories. Here, the widow's story began to unfold in whispers carried on the wind. Once she had been Margaret, a wife and mother, radiant and full of life. Her husband, a lighthouse keeper and sailor, had promised to return from a fateful voyage. But the sea, cruel and merciless, had swallowed him whole during a violent storm. Margaret's grief had twisted into madness. She wandered the cliffs, calling his name into the howling winds until she vanished one stormy night. Some said her spirit was trapped, cursed to mourn forever, bound to the peak where her love was lost. Others whispered of darker things, bargains struck with ancient forces, shadows that promised to reunite her with the dead at a terrible price. Emily shivered as the air thickened, charged with the weight of sorrow and something darker, an unspoken menace lurking just beyond sight. Suddenly, the lighthouse trembled with a shuddering groan. The broken glass rattled violently as a cold, unseen presence swept through the chamber. Margaret's ghost turned, eyes blazing with a desperate fury. "Leave this place," she hissed, voice echoing like the crash of waves below. Or be claimed by the sea's cold embrace. Emily stepped back, heart racing, realizing that the lighthouse was no longer merely haunted. It was alive with the torment of the past and eager to claim another soul. Emily stumbled backward from the apparition's chilling command, heart pounding like a war drum against her ribs. The air grew heavy, thick with salt and the scent of brine-drenched earth. But beneath it lurked something darker, a coldness that seeped into her bones, threatening to extinguish the flickering flame of courage within her. The ghostly figure of Margaret hovered silently for a moment longer, her mournful eyes locked onto Emily's with a desperate intensity. Then, as if torn by invisible chains, she turned slowly, drifting toward the spiraling staircase descending into the lighthouse's forgotten cellar. Driven by a mixture of dread and determination, Emily followed. The narrow steps creaked underfoot, echoing through the hollow tower like the ticking of a long-dead clock. With each step downward, the temperature plummeted further, the darkness thickening until it felt almost tangible, pressing in from all sides. At the bottom, Emily found herself in a cramped, damp cellar lined with ancient crates and rusted machinery long since abandoned. The flicker of her flashlight revealed scrawled messages on the walls, words in faded ink and charcoal. She waits beneath. Never let her rise. The curse runs deep. A shudder ran through Emily as a whisper grazed her ear, a soft, sorrowful lament that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves. "You shouldn't be here," the voice breathed, fragile yet filled with warning. Before she could respond, the cellar door slammed shut with a violent bang, plunging her into suffocating darkness. Her flashlight flickered erratically, struggling against the oppressive blackness that seemed to breathe and pulse with life. Suddenly, the faint outline of a figure emerged, a shadowy woman draped in seaweed and salt-stained cloth, eyes glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. It was the true form of the widow, Margaret's spirit twisted by grief and vengeance, bound by a curse that tethered her to the rocky cliffs. The ghost's voice was a mournful wail. "They took him from me, my love, my life. Now you shall join me in eternal sorrow." Emily's breath caught as the spectre reached out, icy fingers brushing her cheek like shards of frozen glass. The world tilted, a crashing tide of despair threatening to drag her beneath its surface. With a gasp, Emily fought the encroaching darkness, her hands trembling as she gripped a small silver locket she'd found among the relics upstairs, her grandmother's, left as a talisman against the unknown. The locket pulsed warmly in her palm, a beacon of light amid the shadow. Clutching it tightly, Emily whispered a prayer, and a sudden warmth spread through the cellar, pushing back the suffocating gloom. Margaret recoiled, shrieking in fury as the light pierced her tortured form. The cellar shook violently, dust and debris cascading from the ceiling as the spirit's anguished cries echoed off the stone walls. Emily seized the moment, rushing to the cellar door and wrenching it open. She fled upward, heart pounding, the ghost's screams chasing her like the roar of a tempest. Bursting into the night air, Emily collapsed on the cliff's edge, gasping for breath. The storm clouds had parted, revealing a calm sea beneath a star-strewn sky. Yet even in the peaceful light, she knew the curse was far from broken. The widow's peak still held its secrets, whispers of sorrow, shadows of madness, and a grief that refused to rest. And Emily's own story was only beginning. The moon hung low over the ancient cemetery, casting long skeletal shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the weathered stones. Ivy choked the cracked mausoleums, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decayed leaves. The night was silent, except for the crunch of dry twigs beneath footsteps, soft, hesitant, and burdened with unease. Jonathan Pierce stepped carefully between tombstones that bore names long lost to memory, their inscriptions faded by centuries of rain and neglect. The crypts ahead loomed like dark sentinels, their iron gates twisted and rusted, guarding secrets buried beneath layers of time. He was drawn here by an old letter discovered among his late grandfather's belongings, a cryptic note hinting at a family secret buried within the forgotten crypts of Ravenswood Cemetery. The letter spoke of whispers carried by the dead, warnings etched in stone, and a curse that had haunted his bloodline for generations. Jonathan's fingers tightened around the worn, leather-bound journal his grandfather had left behind, its pages filled with frantic scrawls and sketches of cryptic symbols. Tonight, he intended to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As he approached the largest crypt, its entrance framed by grotesque gargoyle statues with chipped faces, a cold wind stirred. The iron gates groaned open as if beckoning him inside. The interior was a tomb of shadows. Walls lined with niches held ancient coffins, their surfaces mottled with mold and dust. Flickering lanterns, left by unknown visitors long ago, cast ghostly light, illuminating faded murals of death and resurrection painted on cracked plaster. Jonathan's footsteps echoed in the vaulted chamber as whispers, soft, unintelligible, curling through the stale air. He paused, straining to listen, but the voices seemed to come from the very stones themselves, ancient echoes from a time when the dead were restless and vengeful. Suddenly the ground trembled beneath him. Dust rained from the ceiling as a deep, resonant groan reverberated through the crypt. Jonathan's heart pounded as a hidden passage slid open, a yawning maw revealing steps descending into darkness. With no turning back, he lit a candle and descended. The air grew colder, the darkness thicker, until he felt it. The presence of something ancient and malevolent lurking just beyond the flicker of flame. From the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in tattered burial shrouds, eyes glowing with unnatural light. The crypt's restless dead had awakened. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat as the cloaked figure emerged from the shadows, its form shifting like mist caught between the living and the dead. The glowing eyes bore into him, ancient and merciless, speaking a language older than time, a silent promise of judgment and despair. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay and forgotten memories. Walls whispered secrets as dust danced in the candlelight, swirling like restless spirits, eager to claim the unwary. His fingers tightened around the flickering candle, its flame wavering but unyielding against the oppressive darkness. He took a cautious step back, heart pounding in his ears as the figure advanced, its movements fluid and unnatural. A voice, cold and hollow, echoed through the chamber, words carried on a wind that chilled the soul. "You dare disturb the slumber of the forsaken. Blood binds you here, and blood shall seal your fate." Jonathan's eyes darted to the journal in his hand. The symbols scrawled within now made horrific sense. Rituals to bind the dead, curses cast to protect the secrets below. With a surge of desperate courage, he began to recite the incantations, voice trembling but resolute. The figure recoiled, the glowing eyes flickering as the ancient power of the rites pushed back the darkness. But the crypt was vast, its depths endless. From the hidden passages, more figures rose, spectres of the forgotten, faces twisted in eternal torment, reaching out with skeletal hands. Jonathan retreated deeper into the labyrinth, the candlelight barely keeping the shadows at bay. Every step was a battle against the creeping despair, the weight of centuries pressing down like a stone grave. The final chamber awaited, a sarcophagus etched with the mark of his ancestors and the source of the curse. As he approached, the ground trembled, and the air grew electric with malevolent energy. With a prayer and a steady hand, Jonathan opened the stone lid. Inside lay not bones, but a dark heart, pulsing with unholy life, the source of the crypt's restless curse. The echoes of the forgotten cried out, their voices a deafening chorus urging release or doom. Jonathan knew then that his bloodline's fate and his own was intertwined with the darkness below. To break the curse, he would have to confront the heart of darkness itself, risking his soul to silence the echoes forever. The ancient clock tower of St. Marcellus Chapel struck midnight, each toll reverberating through the vaulted sanctuary like a dirge for forgotten souls. The heavy wooden beams creaked in protest under the weight of years, while flickering candlelight cast long, trembling shadows across the worn stone floor. Outside, the wind moaned mournfully through the gnarled branches of leafless oaks, their skeletal forms scratching against the stained glass windows like desperate hands seeking entry. Inside the chapel, silence reigned, but it was a silence that pressed heavily on the chest, suffocating and thick with unseen menace. Father Gabriel sat alone within the confessional booth, the dim glow of a single candle barely illuminating his weary face. Years of pastoral care had carved deep lines of compassion and sorrow upon his countenance, but tonight there was something new, an edge of unease lurking beneath his calm demeanor. The village had long whispered dark stories about the chapel, rumors carried on hushed breaths, confessions that led to madness, secrets that twisted minds, and an ancient presence that preyed on those who sought solace beneath its sacred roof. Gabriel had dismissed these as mere superstition until the night he received a letter, unsigned, urging him to prepare for the coming darkness during the midnight confessions. As the second hand swept toward the hour, the confessional door creaked open, its hinges groaning like a dying creature. A young woman entered, her footsteps hesitant, eyes wide with terror. Her hands trembled as she drew the screen between them, enclosing them in the dim, suffocating space.
"Father,"
she whispered, voice barely more than a breath,
"I have sinned, and I fear the darkness has taken root in my soul."
Gabriel's voice was soft, a steady balm against the storm of her fear. "Speak freely, child. The Lord listens, and his mercy is boundless." Her confession spilled forth in fragmented sobs and halting words, Tales of voices whispering in the dead of night, shadows flickering just beyond her vision, and a presence watching from the periphery of her dreams. She spoke of dreams turned nightmares, of waking to find claw marks on her flesh and a cold breath upon her neck when no one was near. With every word, the candle flickered more violently, casting grotesque shapes upon the confessional walls. Gabriel's skin prickled. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the chapel itself inhaled in anticipation. Suddenly, a chilling draught swept through the booth, extinguishing the candle in a wisp of smoke and leaving them enveloped in suffocating darkness. Gabriel's fingers brushed against his rosary, tracing the familiar beads in desperate prayer. "Have faith," he whispered, though his voice betrayed the tremor within. "We face trials to cleanse the soul." A sudden thud echoed from the sanctuary outside, followed by a series of scratches against the wooden confessional walls. The woman gasped, clutching the screen with white-knuckled fingers.
"They're here," she breathed. "The shadows. The ones who take the lost."
The confessional doors slammed shut with a thunderous crash, sealing them in a prison of darkness. Outside, the stained glass windows shimmered with an unnatural hue, colors bleeding and twisting into nightmarish patterns. Gabriel's heart pounded as he whispered fervent prayers, beads slipping through his fingers. The oppressive blackness seemed to press inward, whispering cruel promises and dragging at his mind with icy fingers. Suddenly, the faintest flicker of light returned, a spectral glow emanating from the woman's hands. Between her trembling fingers, a small crucifix pulsed with ethereal light, casting a fragile glow that pushed back the shadows just enough to reveal their grotesque forms. Figures emerged, twisted, ephemeral wraiths with hollow eyes and gaping mouths frozen in silent screams. Their forms shimmered and wavered, reaching out with skeletal hands that seemed to dissolve upon contact. Gabriel steeled himself, raising his voice in a battle cry of faith and defiance. "Begone, foul spirits! In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit!" The chapel trembled, the walls echoing with their cries and the clash of ancient powers. Light and shadow battled in a desperate dance, each vying for dominion over the sacred space. Through the chaos, the woman's voice rose, a piercing lament and a plea for deliverance. Gabriel knew this confession was no mere exchange of sins. It was a battle for a tormented soul caught between salvation and eternal darkness. As the first rays of dawn broke through the stained glass, the shadows recoiled, dissolving into whispers carried away on the morning breeze. Exhausted and trembling, Gabriel and the woman emerged from the confessional, changed forever by the midnight trial, bound by a secret that would haunt the chapel for years to come. Dawn crept slowly through the cracked stained glass, casting fractured beams of color onto the cold stone floor of St. Marcellus Chapel. The first light of morning struggled against the lingering shadows that clung stubbornly to the corners of the nave, refusing to relinquish their hold. Father Gabriel remained seated within the confessional booth, his hands clasped tightly around the cool wood, fingers white with strain. The young woman who had entered the night before was gone, vanished as mysteriously as she had appeared. Yet the weight of her confession lingered, an invisible shroud pressing against Gabriel's heart, threatening to suffocate the fragile peace he fought to maintain. He rubbed his weary eyes, trying to shake the images etched deep into his mind. The spectral figures, the oppressive darkness, the desperate plea for salvation that had echoed through the suffocating blackness. Was it real, or the fevered product of a soul stretched to its breaking point? The heavy oak door of the chapel creaked open, drawing Gabriel's gaze. A figure stepped inside. Father Matteo, his fellow priest, bearing a look of grim concern. "Gabriel," Matteo said quietly, closing the distance between them. The villagers speak of strange happenings tonight. Screams from the chapel, lights flickering, shadows moving where no shadow should be. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "I heard them too, and I saw things that should not be." Matteo's eyes darkened. The midnight confession has become more than a ritual. It is a battleground. Evil stirs, feeding on the fears and sins of those who seek absolution. Gabriel nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his friend's words. "We must prepare. The darkness will return with the next nightfall, and we will need to stand firm, not just with prayers, but with courage." That evening, as the sun sank beneath the horizon, a cold wind swept through the village, rattling shutters and stirring the restless dead. Within the chapel, the candle flames flickered uncertainly, casting eerie shadows that writhed across the stone walls like living things. The confessional doors opened once more, and Gabriel steeled himself. This time it was a man who entered, a figure cloaked in despair, eyes haunted by nameless horrors. As the man began to speak, his voice trembling with terror, Gabriel sensed the presence lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The shadows thickened, whispering dark promises and vile threats. Suddenly the chapel plunged into darkness, candles extinguished by an unseen breath. The man's screams echoed through the void, mingling with the chilling laughter of something ancient and cruel. Gabriel grasped his rosary, chanting fervently as spectral hands reached from the darkness, seeking to drag the soul of the penitent into the abyss. The battle raged through the night, faith clashing against malevolence in a desperate struggle for redemption. As dawn broke once more, the darkness receded, leaving behind silence and the faintest trace of hope. Gabriel knew the midnight confessions were far from over. The chapel was a threshold, a battleground where souls were fought for, lost, and sometimes saved. And he was its guardian. The blood moon rose slowly above Raven's Hollow, its eerie crimson glow spilling across the darkened sky like a wound in the heavens. The village below seemed to hold its breath, shrouded in an unnatural silence that weighed heavily on the soul. Doors were bolted tight, windows barred with planks and iron, and the faintest flicker of candlelight danced nervously behind cracked curtains. Eleanor stood at the forest's edge, the crimson light washing over her pale face, illuminating the tangled curls that clung damply to her forehead. Her breath came shallow and fast, each exhale a misty ghost swallowed by the chill night air. Behind her, the village she called home lay trapped in fear, haunted by a curse as old as the twisted oaks surrounding the hollow. She tightened her grip around the ancient amulet that hung heavy from a leather cord about her neck. The talisman, etched with intricate sigils of protection, was said to hold the power to shield against the restless dead, an heirloom passed down through generations of women in her family who had faced the same darkness. Tonight, Eleanor would face it. The legend of the Raven's Hollow curse was whispered in trembling voices of a woman betrayed and murdered beneath the sacred oaks, her blood spilled like sacrilege upon the earth. Her spirit, a wrathful wraith bound by pain and vengeance, rose with each blood moon to claim those who bore the mark of her lineage. It was said that her fury was endless, a hunger that could only be sated by the blood of the innocent. Eleanor's heart ached for her younger brother Jacob, taken during last year's blood moon. His screams had echoed through the night, swallowed by the dark woods as he vanished without trace. Since then, the village had grown quiet, shadows deepening like a suffocating cloak. Now, armed with old rites and a fierce will, Eleanor ventured into the forest's depths, determined to break the curse or be consumed by it. The forest seemed alive, the ancient trees swaying as if whispering secrets in a language long forgotten. The air was thick with moss and damp earth, and the scent of decayed leaves filled her lungs. Twigs snapped underfoot, but no animals stirred, only the haunting silence of the dead. Whispers brushed her ears, soft, mournful voices threading through the rustling leaves. "Return! Beware! She waits." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the amulet. She pressed onward, guided by a pull she could neither explain nor resist. Deep within the woods, she reached a clearing ringed with ancient stones, their surfaces cracked and weathered by time. In the center, the ground was stained a dark, unforgiving red, a cruel scar on the earth. This was the place of the original betrayal, a place soaked with sorrow and blood. As the blood moon's light bathed the clearing, Eleanor stepped into the circle. The temperature dropped sharply, and the wind stilled to a dead silence, pressing against her like the breath of a beast. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall and spectral, cloaked in tattered black, her eyes burning with an unnatural fire. The spirit's presence twisted the air, distorting the world as if reality itself recoiled in fear. The woman's voice was both a whisper and a scream, an ancient echo of rage and despair. "Why do you seek me, child of the bloodline? What price will you pay for the lost?" Elena swallowed her fear, meeting the gaze that seemed to pierce her very soul. "I will pay any price. I will break this curse. I will save my brother." The spirit's lips curled into a cruel smile, revealing teeth like shattered bone. "So many have come before you, bound by love and desperation, all consumed. What makes you different?" A sudden gust tore through the clearing, carrying the scent of salt and decay. The ground trembled as the spirit raised a hand, summoning tendrils of shadow that writhed like living serpents. Eleanor held the amulet high, its sigils glowing faintly as a shield against the encroaching darkness. She began to chant the ancient prayers passed down by her foremothers, voice steady despite the terror gnawing at her heart. The spirit shrieked, a sound that shattered the night like a glass bell, and the shadows recoiled, only to surge forward again with renewed fury. The battle had begun. Eleanor's voice rang clear and resolute as she repeated the ancient incantations, each word a beacon of light against the suffocating darkness that clawed at her soul. The amulet around her neck pulsed with a warm, steady glow, a fragile but potent shield against the spectral tempest unleashed by the vengeful spirit. The clearing twisted and warped as the spirit's rage manifested, shadows stretching into monstrous shapes, their eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. The wind roared like a furious beast, whipping through the trees and sending leaves swirling in a chaotic dance of despair. "Elena." The voice was soft now, edged with sorrow and longing. "Why do you resist what is inevitable? Blood is bound to blood. The curse is eternal." She gritted her teeth, stepping deeper into the stone circle, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on her shoulders. "I will break the chains. Your torment ends tonight." The spirit's eyes flickered with something almost human, a flicker of pain and regret. but it vanished quickly, replaced by a mask of cold fury. Suddenly, the ground beneath Elena's feet shuddered violently, cracking open to reveal a pit of swirling darkness. From its depths, pale hands reached upward, grasping at her ankles, trying to drag her into the abyss. With a scream, Elena kicked free, stumbling backward but steadying herself against a weathered stone. The ritual was weakening the curse, but the forces arrayed against her were desperate and cruel. From the shadows emerged twisted forms, the lost souls claimed by the curse, their faces twisted in eternal anguish. They circled Eleanor, their voices rising in a mournful chorus of warning and accusation. "Join us! Surrender!" Eleanor closed her eyes, summoning every ounce of will. The amulet flared brightly, casting the shadows back into the void. She took a deep breath and began the final prayer, a plea for mercy and release. The spirit shrieked, the sound fracturing the night as a brilliant light erupted from the amulet, bathing the clearing in pure radiance. The cursed hands recoiled, the lost souls faded into whispers, and the pit sealed shut as if it had never existed. As the blood moon waned and the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, Eleanor collapsed to her knees, exhausted but victorious. The curse that had haunted Raven's Hollow for centuries was broken, for now. Yet, as she looked toward the tranquil village below, a chilling thought lingered. Some darkness never truly dies, and some debts remain unpaid. In the forgotten village of Greywood, where twisted trees whispered secrets and the fog curled like ghostly fingers around weathered stone cottages, there was a small, crooked shop that even the bravest dared not enter after dusk. The sign above its door hung askew, its letters faded and worn, Abernathy's Dolls, a name spoken in hushed tones and wary glances. Eleanor had grown up hearing the stories. Tales spun around flickering fires about the old doll maker who lived alone, crafting wonders that defied explanation. But the stories were darker still, of children who vanished, of dolls found in empty cradles, their glassy eyes reflecting horrors too terrible to name. One stormy evening, compelled by a restless curiosity that gnawed at her soul, Eleanor found herself standing before the shop's grimy window. Rain traced ghostly rivulets down the glass, distorting the pale faces that stared out at her. Porcelain dolls with cracked smiles, delicate hands frozen in time, eyes that seemed to gleam with a life all their own. She shivered, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and something metallic, faint but unmistakable. With a trembling hand, she reached for the door, and before she could knock, it creaked open on rusty hinges. Mrs. Abernathy stood framed in the doorway, a wraith of a woman cloaked in shadow. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, flickered like candle flames, and her lips curled into a smile that was both inviting and menacing.
"Come in, child,"
she said softly, voice like dry leaves rustling over a graveyard.
"The night is long, and stories need telling."
Inside the shop was a labyrinth of shelves crammed with dolls, each one more unsettling than the last. Some were exquisitely crafted, their features delicate and lifelike, while others were grotesque, twisted parodies of childhood innocence. The flicker of candlelight cast their shadows large and warped on the walls, making it seem as if they were watching, waiting. Mrs. Abernathy moved gracefully among them, her fingers brushing the dust-covered porcelain as she began to speak. Her voice wove a dark tale of a man driven by obsession and madness, a doll maker who sought immortality through forbidden means. He had bargained with forces beyond mortal comprehension, sacrificing his humanity to infuse his creations with the essence of life itself. Each doll held within it a fragment of a child's soul, a spark of innocence trapped in eternal silence.
"Do you know,"
she whispered, "what happens when those souls grow restless? When the silence becomes a scream no one else can hear?" Eleanor felt a chill crawl along her spine as the doll's eyes seemed to shimmer, their delicate fingers twitching imperceptibly. The room seemed to close in, the shadows thickening like a suffocating cloak. Outside, the storm's fury intensified, lightning flashing through the windows, illuminating the shop's dark corners. Thunder rumbled like the growl of some ancient beast awakened from slumber. "Mrs." Abernathy's gaze met Eleanor's, her smile deepening. "Some say the curse lies not in the dolls themselves, but in the price paid to create them. A price paid in blood and madness." Eleanor's breath caught as the distant sound of children's laughter echoed, soft, haunting, and utterly out of place in the desolate village. She glanced toward the window, but saw only the swirling mist and shadows. The doll-maker's legacy was alive, and it was hungry. The candlelight flickered uncertainly as Eleanor stood frozen amidst the rows of porcelain faces. Each doll's glassy eyes seemed to watch her with a hunger that defied explanation, as if centuries of trapped souls begged silently for release. The shop felt alive, breathing in sync with her quickening heartbeat. "Mrs." Abernathy's voice sliced through the thick silence, low and grave. The doll-maker's final creation was his masterpiece, and his undoing. She led Eleanor toward a locked cabinet, its wood carved with intricate symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. With a trembling hand, the old woman produced a key from beneath her shawl, turning it slowly to reveal a single doll, smaller than the others, but exquisitely detailed. Its face bore an uncanny resemblance to a child from Eleanor's own village, one who had disappeared years ago under mysterious circumstances.
"This,"
whispered Mrs. Abernathy, "is the vessel of the last trapped soul. The doll-maker's curse is unbroken, and the child's spirit remains bound within." A sudden chill swept through the room as the doll's eyes blinked once. A slow, deliberate motion that sent a shudder down Eleanor's spine. "I need your help," Mrs. Abernathy said, urgency threading her words. "To break the curse, the souls must be freed, but the doll-maker's spirit guards them jealously." The shop seemed to close tighter around them as shadows lengthened. A distant, eerie lullaby floated through the air, a haunting melody that twisted and warped, filling Eleanor's mind with a dreadful nostalgia. Suddenly, the dolls began to move, small, jerky motions that grew more fluid and deliberate. Their porcelain limbs shifted, their heads turned. The shop was alive with whispers and faint giggles that morphed into tortured screams. Eleanor's heart raced as the room plunged into darkness. Only the glow from the cursed doll's eyes illuminated the chaos, a malevolent beacon in a sea of terror. Grasping the amulet her grandmother had given her, Eleanor stepped forward, her voice steady as she began to chant an ancient incantation, words learned from dusty tomes and whispered legends. The dolls recoiled, their faces contorting in rage and agony. A fierce wind whipped through the shop, scattering candles and lifting dust into swirling vortices. The doll-maker's spirit manifested, a shadowy figure bound in chains of sorrow and rage. With a cry, Eleanor pressed on, the power of the incantation growing, binding the curse and unraveling the twisted magic that had ensnared the souls for generations. Light exploded through the darkness as the dolls shattered, releasing the trapped spirits in a cascade of shimmering motes. The shop fell silent once more. Breathless and trembling, Eleanor knew the curse was broken, for now. But the dollmaker's wrath was a whisper on the wind, a promise that darkness could return when least expected. The rain was unrelenting, a relentless cascade that turned the mountain road into a treacherous ribbon slick with water and fallen leaves. Each drop hammered the car's roof like tiny drums, the sound masking the tense silence inside. David Gray's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel as he navigated the winding curves with practiced caution, the headlights slicing through sheets of rain and darkness. His eyes darted nervously between the blurred landscape beyond the windshield and the flickering fuel gauge. The needle hovered dangerously close to empty. Behind him, the storm brewed with increasing fury, its distant rumbles rolling over the hills like the growl of a restless beast. David had been driving for hours, racing against time and the elements. The cabin was still miles away, a refuge from the city's chaos and from the nagging memories that had chased him relentlessly these past weeks. Tonight was supposed to be the start of a much-needed retreat, a chance to find peace in solitude. But peace was elusive, especially on nights like this. Out of the corner of his eye, something caught his attention. A figure standing at the edge of the road. A woman, drenched and pale, barely visible through the rain's veil. Her clothes clung to her like a second skin, darkened with wetness, her long hair plastered to her face. David's instinct screamed to stop. He slammed on the brakes. The tires screamed against the asphalt, hydroplaning dangerously, and the car fishtailed before grinding to a shuddering halt just feet from the woman. His heart thudded painfully as he unlocked the door and reached out a hand. "Are you all right?" "What are you doing out here?" The woman said nothing. Her eyes were wide and glassy, reflecting the car's dim interior light in a way that felt unnatural, empty, yet all-consuming. David shivered as a chill seeped from her very presence, an icy void that seemed to suck warmth from the air. "Come on, get inside," he urged, voice trembling slightly. She didn't respond, but slowly, without a word, stepped into the car. The warmth inside was a sharp contrast to the cold rain outside, but the chill clung to the woman, radiating like a dark aura. David's fingers instinctively tightened around his jacket, his mind racing with questions he dared not voice. "Where are you headed? Do you need help?" he asked again. Still, no reply, only silence, thick and suffocating. David cast a glance in the rear-view mirror. The woman sat motionless, her gaze fixed forward, unblinking. His unease deepened as he noticed the faint stains on her dress, dark, crusted, like dried blood. His stomach clenched. The road ahead twisted sharply, and David focused intently on maneuvering the car. Lightning flashed, illuminating the forest's skeletal branches, clawing at the stormy sky. The thunder that followed was a guttural roar, shaking the vehicle as if the heavens themselves were enraged. It was then the strange things began. The rear-view mirror flickered with shadows that didn't match the passing trees. Soft whispers slipped through the air vents, indistinct but undeniably present. The hairs on the back of David's neck stood on end. He dared to look back again. The woman's face remained eerily still, but her eyes glowed faintly, a dim, unnatural light that sent a shiver racing through his spine. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw a cruel smile twitch at her lips. Then it vanished. David's breathing grew shallow. The car hit a slick patch, fishtailing toward the cliff's edge. Panic surged as he wrestled the steering wheel, heart pounding in his throat. The vehicle skidded dangerously close to the precipice before he managed to regain control. The woman's silent presence pressed upon him like a suffocating weight.
"Who are you?"
he whispered, voice barely audible over the storm. No answer. The rain intensified, drumming relentlessly, drowning out even the car's engine. Outside, the darkness seemed to thicken, swallowing the road, the trees, the very world around him. David knew, in that moment, he was no longer alone, not just in the car, but in a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred, where ancient shadows prowled freely. And the silent passenger beside him was no mere hitchhiker. The storm raged with relentless fury, its howl merging with the roar of the car's engine as David fought to keep control on the treacherous mountain road. Every muscle ached with tension, every nerve screaming in alarm. The woman beside him remained still, a ghostly presence, untouched by the chaos around them. David stole another glance at her face in the dim glow of the dashboard. Her eyes, though unblinking, shimmered with an unnatural light, piercing the shadows. The faint stains on her dress seemed darker now, almost as if they pulsed with some malevolent life. A sudden chill enveloped the car, frost creeping along the edges of the windshield, obscuring the road ahead. David's breath fogged the glass as he struggled to see, heart pounding. Then from the back seat came a faint whisper, a voice low and hollow, barely audible over the storm. "David!" He froze. The name, uttered with an icy breath, sent a shudder down his spine. The woman's lips did not move.
Who are you?"
He stammered, voice tight with fear. No answer. Only that chilling silence. The car lurched violently as if struck by an unseen force. David's hands gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white. Shadows writhed in the corners of his vision, dark shapes flickering and dissolving. The whisper came again, closer, more insistent.
"David, you can't escape."
The temperature plummeted further, his breath now visible in the air, a frozen mist swirling inside the cabin. The woman's face shifted subtly, a cruel smile flickering like a flame in the darkness. David's mind raced. Memories surfaced unbidden, visions of a past he had tried to forget. A car accident, a scream, a figure disappearing into the night. Was this woman a phantom of guilt? A spectre of retribution? Lightning illuminated the road ahead, revealing a narrow bridge spanning a yawning chasm. The rails were broken in places, the structure groaning under the storm's assault. David's hands trembled as he steered toward it, the car's headlights barely piercing the gloom. Midway across, the engine sputtered, a sputter that grew into a coughing death rattle. The car stalled. Trapped. Outside, the storm's fury seemed to swell, the wind howling through the broken bridge like a chorus of lost souls. David reached for the door handle, but it was frozen shut, as if sealed by some unnatural force. Behind him, the woman's breath was cold against his neck. "You can't leave. Not yet." Desperation surged as the whispers grew louder, surrounding him with a symphony of despair. The car began to shake, shadows pressing in, dark hands reaching through the windows. With a roar, David forced his eyes shut, clutching the rosary in his pocket, a talisman from his childhood, a fragile shield against the encroaching nightmare. When he dared to look again, the storm had faded. The woman was gone, but the silence was thick with unspoken threats. David knew this was no ordinary night. The silent passenger was a herald of a darkness that had claimed him, and perhaps would never let go. At the end of Hollow Street, shrouded beneath the looming shadows of twisted oaks, stood the old Victorian house, a relic from a bygone era. Its faded paint peeled like shedding skin, and the ornate trim, once a testament to craftsmanship, now hung broken and lifeless. Vines crawled hungrily over its sides, as if the earth itself sought to reclaim what had long been abandoned. The Ellis family arrived under a grey, overcast sky that seemed to foretell the unease to come. James and Margaret, eager for a fresh start away from the city's suffocating pace, had purchased the home at a bargain, charmed by its history and grandeur. Their children, Rachel, aged 10, and her younger brother Sam, were less enthusiastic, drawn to the eerie silence that enveloped the house like a shroud. From the moment they crossed the threshold, the house seemed to breathe, a slow, deliberate inhalation that stirred dust motes in the stale air. The floorboards groaned underfoot, and shadows clung to the corners like living things, retreating only when the flicker of the firelight chased them away. Rachel felt it most keenly. At night, the house whispered to her in hushed tones, voices curling from the walls like tendrils of smoke. She would lie awake in the dark, eyes fixed on the peeling wallpaper, hearing her name spoken softly, an invitation, a summons. Her parents dismissed it as nerves, the imagination of a child adjusting to a new home. But Rachel knew better. The whispers grew louder each night, their cadence shifting from gentle to urgent. One evening, as a thunderstorm brewed, Rachel wandered the house alone, her small footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Lightning illuminated faded portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to watch her with unyielding judgment. In her bedroom, Rachel's gaze was drawn to a loose floorboard near the closet. It seemed to pulse beneath her fingers, and with a gentle tug, it lifted to reveal a hidden cavity. Inside lay an old leather-bound diary, brittle with age. She opened it cautiously, revealing cramped handwriting and pages stained with time. The diary belonged to Lillian, a girl who had lived in the house over 100 years ago. Lillian's words spilled forth in a torrent of sorrow and fear. She wrote of a presence in the walls, a shadow that whispered promises and threats, feeding on loneliness and despair. Lillian's entries became more frantic, describing voices that spoke of escape from pain at a terrible cost. As Rachel read, a chill swept through the room. The whispers outside grew louder, a chorus of sorrow and warning that wrapped around her like a cold embrace. The house was alive, and it was listening. That night, Rachel was awoken by a soft tapping, like fingernails rapping on wood. The sound led her to the basement door, an ancient slab of oak covered in faded symbols and scratches. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of damp earth and something unnameable. With trembling hands, Rachel pushed open the door and descended into darkness. The basement was a cavern of shadows, lined with relics of forgotten lives, broken furniture, shattered glass, and rusted tools. At its center was a second door, smaller and more ornate, its surface carved with the same cryptic symbols as above. Rachel reached out, her fingers brushing the cool wood. The symbols pulsed faintly, a heartbeat in the darkness. Summoning her courage, she turned the handle and stepped through into the unknown. Beyond the door lay a narrow passageway, walls slick with moisture and dripping with cold condensation. The whispers surged, voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony of pain and longing. Rachel's footsteps echoed as she ventured deeper, drawn toward a hidden secret that could unravel the house's darkest mysteries and change her life forever. The narrow passage seemed to stretch endlessly before Rachel, the damp walls closing in like the arms of some ancient beast. Each step echoed hollowly, the faint drip of water from unseen cracks marking time like a sinister heartbeat. The whispers swelled, no longer gentle murmurs, but a crescendo of voices pleading, warning, and sometimes crying out in anguish. Rachel's fingers grazed the cold stone as she moved deeper, the symbols from the basement door etched faintly on the walls, runes of binding and protection now worn by centuries of neglect. She clutched the diary tightly as if it were a talisman against the darkness pressing in around her. Suddenly, the passage opened into a cavernous chamber lit by an ethereal glow emanating from phosphorescent fungi clinging to the walls. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and shadows danced in the flickering light. In the center of the chamber stood an ancient altar, carved from a single block of black stone veined with crimson. Upon it lay a shattered mirror, its jagged fragments scattered like broken souls. The whispers converged here, swirling in a vortex of sound and emotion. Rachel stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She placed the diary on the altar and began to read aloud, the words of Lillian echoing through the chamber. Bound by sorrow, trapped by pain, whispers call in endless rain. Broken mirror, shattered past, free the souls, release at last. As the last words left her lips, the air shifted, the whispers rising to a fevered pitch before exploding into silence. The mirror fragments glowed softly, then began to levitate, swirling together until the mirror reformed, its surface shimmering with spectral light. Reflected within was not Rachel's own image, but a procession of ghostly figures, faces of those long lost to the house's dark grasp. Their eyes were filled with longing and sorrow, silently pleading for release. The mirror cracked again, splintering into countless shards that scattered across the chamber floor, each reflecting a fragment of the past, visions of joy, betrayal, and tragedy woven into the house's very walls. Suddenly, a cold hand grasped Rachel's wrist, icy fingers digging into her flesh. She spun around, heart racing, to find herself face to face with a translucent figure, the spirit of Lillian herself, her eyes hollow, yet pleading. "You have the strength to break the curse," the ghost whispered, voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "But beware, the house feeds on fear, and it will not relinquish its hold easily." Rachel nodded, determination hardening within her. She knew the journey ahead would be perilous, but the whispers in the walls had guided her this far. As she turned to leave, the chamber trembled, the shadows deepening into writhing forms that surged toward her like a tide of darkness. Clutching the diary and her courage, Rachel ran back through the passage, the voices chasing her with a fury born of centuries. Emerging into the basement, the door slammed shut behind her with a finality that echoed through the silent house. The whispers faded, replaced by a heavy silence, a pause before the storm that would decide the fate of the souls trapped within the walls. Rachel knew she was no longer just a visitor in the house. She was now part of its story, a beacon of hope against the shadows that whispered in the walls. The iron gates of Blackwood Asylum groaned open with a reluctant creak, their rusted hinges protesting after years of neglect. Ivy clung to the wrought iron like grasping fingers, while the surrounding trees, twisted and gnarled, cast long shadows over the cracked stone path leading to the entrance. The moon hung low and full, bathing the decaying structure in a pale spectral light. For decades, Blackwood had stood abandoned, its walls silently bearing witness to horrors long buried beneath layers of dust and silence. Local townsfolk dared not speak its name aloud, for the asylum's dark reputation was woven into the fabric of whispered legends, tales of cruel experiments, unspeakable treatments, and the restless souls of patients who had vanished within its labyrinthine corridors. Ethan Marlowe, a documentary filmmaker with a passion for uncovering buried truths, tightened the strap of his camera bag and stepped onto the cracked flagstones. Behind him, his small crew followed hesitantly, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and unease. "This is it," Ethan said softly, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Blackwood Asylum, the place where hope went to die. The heavy double doors, once painted a proud white, now hung ajar, revealing darkness that seemed to swallow the feeble beam of their flashlights. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew, decaying wood, and a faint metallic tang that set their nerves on edge. Their footsteps echoed hollowly as they moved through the cavernous lobby. Torn curtains fluttered in a non-existent breeze, and faded posters warning of mental health dangers hung crooked on cracked walls. The grand chandelier above had long since surrendered to rust and neglect, its broken crystals tinkling softly as the crew passed beneath. Ethan's camera lens captured every detail: the peeling paint, the crumbled plaster, the graffiti scrawled by trespassers who had come before them. But it was the silence that spoke loudest, a heavy, suffocating quiet that pressed upon them like a physical weight. They ventured deeper into the asylum's bowels, down long hallways lined with rusted iron beds and dented wheelchairs. Old medical charts littered the floor, their ink smeared and faded, names lost to time. The remnants of a forgotten past lay scattered like bones, waiting to tell their story. Then came the voices. At first they were barely perceptible, soft murmurs carried on the stale air. But as they approached the treatment wing, the whispers grew louder, coalescing into anguished cries that sent shivers down their spines. Ethan adjusted his camera, the lens flickering as if struggling to capture something beyond the visible spectrum. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. A sudden cold draft swept through the hallway, snuffing out their flashlights. Darkness engulfed them, broken only by the faint glow of Ethan's camera screen. Shadows shifted at the edges of their vision, twisting into grotesque shapes that seemed to leer and mock. A low moan rose from the depths of the asylum, a sound of pure despair and rage that clawed at their sanity. "Stay close," Ethan urged, voice trembling despite his resolve. They moved forward, hearts pounding, into the chamber of horrors, the old electroshock room, frozen in time. Rusted restraints hung from the walls, stained with the ghosts of pain and suffering. An ancient machine sat ominously in the center, its wires frayed and dangling like serpents, ready to strike. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the far end of the room, a pale, gaunt woman in a tattered hospital gown. Her eyes, hollow and glassy, locked onto Ethan with a gaze that pierced through the darkness. Paralyzed by fear, Ethan watched as she raised a trembling hand, beckoning him closer. The room seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, and the walls whispered secrets in a language older than the asylum itself. "We're not alone," Ethan murmured, the truth sinking deep into his bones. The asylum was alive, and it remembered everything. The pale figure's outstretched hand trembled, beckoning Ethan deeper into the shadowed chamber. The air grew thick, heavy with a suffocating presence that pressed upon their very souls. The flickering light of their flashlights wavered as unseen eyes watched from every corner. Ethan swallowed hard, his breath hitching as he stepped forward, camera rolling, capturing the haunted tableau before him. The woman's hollow eyes bore into his, reflecting a pain so profound it seemed to echo through time. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the silence. A scream not of this world, raw and unyielding. The walls seemed to pulse with the sound, vibrating as if alive. The restraints on the walls rattled violently, and the ancient machine groaned to life, wires sparking with eerie blue light. The crew scattered, panic rippling through their ranks. Ethan stood rooted, torn between flight and the desperate urge to uncover the truth. From the darkness emerged more figures, ghostly apparitions of former patients, faces contorted in eternal agony. They drifted closer, their silent screams filling the chamber, a chorus of torment that clawed at sanity. Ethan's voice trembled as he called out, "What happened here? What did they do to you?" The spectre's eyes flickered with recognition, their whispers weaving a tale of cruelty, experiments that tore minds apart, treatments that crushed hope, and a darkness that had never left the asylum's walls. A sudden cold hand grasped Ethan's shoulder, icy fingers like shards of glass. He spun around, heart pounding, but found only empty air. "Help us," a voice whispered, fragile and broken. Ethan knew then that Blackwood Asylum was not merely a place of past horrors. It was a prison for souls trapped between worlds, yearning for release. As the night deepened, the crew fought to maintain their courage, but the asylum's secrets pressed ever closer, threatening to consume them all. The forgotten were awake, and their story was far from over. The village of Red Hollow had always carried an air of quiet dread. Nestled in a valley surrounded by dense, ancient woods, the settlement seemed almost forgotten by time. A place where whispered legends clung to the fog like cobwebs, and where every shadow held a story best left untold. At the heart of these stories was the lake, a vast, still body of water whose surface often took on a deep, unsettling hue as the sun dipped low. Locals called it the Blood-Red Lake, a name born of the fiery glow that tinted the waves at dusk and the many dark tales that followed in its wake. Sarah Whitman had grown up listening to the old wives' tales, their warnings stitched into the fabric of village life. "Stay clear of the lake at night," they'd say. "Don't heed the call from beneath the blood-red waves." But Sarah had left Red Hollow years ago, seeking escape from the suffocating grip of superstition and loss. Now, with her younger brother Daniel missing and the official investigation dead-ended, she had returned, driven by a fierce determination to confront the darkness she had once fled. The evening she arrived, a low mist curled over the village, thickening as the sun sank behind the hills. The blood-red hue crept across the lake, staining the water in a way that seemed unnatural, almost alive. Sarah stood at the shoreline, the cold, damp earth pressing against her boots. The lake's surface was eerily calm, reflecting the twisted silhouettes of skeletal trees and the first stars emerging in the twilight sky. The scent of moss and decay hung heavy, mingling with the crisp chill of approaching night. Her breath formed misty clouds in the cool air as she drew her coat tighter. Every instinct screamed at her to turn away, to leave the cursed place behind. But the memories of Daniel, his laughter, his smile, anchored her feet. As twilight deepened, the water began to shimmer with strange phosphorescent lights, flickering beneath the surface like restless spirits. Sarah's pulse quickened, eyes wide as she watched shapes move just below the blood-tinted waves, forms too fluid and swift to be fish. A sudden whisper slithered through the trees, soft and lilting, carrying her name on the breeze.
Sarah.
Her heart lurched, and she spun toward the voice, but the woods were empty. Only the rustling leaves answered. Steeling herself, Sarah stepped closer to the water, her toes touching the frigid edge. The lake rippled, and a faint glow emerged. A faint, ghostly figure rising from the depths. Pale and dripping with water, its eyes glowed with an unnatural fire that held both sorrow and menace. Sarah's breath caught, terror and curiosity warring within her. The figure beckoned, a silent summons that echoed through the still night. She took a hesitant step forward, the lake's cold grasp pulling at her ankles. The surface rippled again, and beneath the glowing figure, dark shapes twisted and writhed like shadows cast by some unholy fire. Memories flashed unbidden, stories of villagers lost to the lake, of midnight cries muffled by waves, of a curse born in blood and betrayal. Sarah knew then that the lake was no mere body of water. It was a threshold, a prison, and a graveyard for secrets darker than the night itself. The nightmare that had stolen her brother was awakening, and she would have to face it alone. The spectral figure's eyes burned like embers, piercing the thick veil of night as it drifted closer to the shore. Sarah's breath caught, cold and ragged, as the unnatural glow reflected in the rippling water cast twisted shadows on her face. The whispers, soft, urgent, seemed to emanate not just from the figure, but from the lake itself, a chorus of lost voices rising from the depths. Daniel! The name echoed in the stillness, a plea tangled with despair. Summoning every shred of courage, Sarah stepped forward, the icy water lapping higher against her legs. The figure extended a translucent hand, beckoning her into the dark embrace of the lake. The chilling touch of the water sent a shiver racing up her spine, but she pressed on, drawn by the fragile hope of finding her brother. Beneath the blood-red surface, shapes writhed and shifted, dark forms with glowing eyes that watched her with ancient hunger. The water's depths seemed endless, a suffocating void where light dared not linger. Sarah's heart pounded as she fought the pull of the lake, resisting the cold grasp that threatened to drag her beneath. Memories flashed, ancient rituals whispered by the village elders, a curse born from betrayal and bloodshed, a spirit bound to the lake's heart, forever hungry. With a sudden surge, the water beneath her exploded into a tempest of shadowy hands and twisting figures, reaching and clawing with desperate fury. Sarah stumbled backward, gasping as the lake seemed to roar in rage. The figure's voice cut through the chaos, clear and commanding. You seek to break the curse, but all must pay the price. The ground beneath Sarah's feet trembled as the lake's dark heart emerged, a colossal, twisted mass of writhing shadows and burning eyes. Its voice was a chorus of agony and wrath, a sound that shattered the night. Sarah stood firm, clutching a talisman passed down through generations, a symbol of protection and hope. With a steady voice, she recited the ancient incantation, the words flowing like a river of light against the darkness. The shadowed mass recoiled, screeching as the talisman's glow intensified, weaving a barrier of pure light that pushed back the curse's grasp. The spectral figure reached out once more, her eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. "Remember," she whispered, "the curse is broken, but its echoes remain. Guard the lake, lest darkness return." As dawn's first light pierced the horizon, the blood-red hue faded, replaced by the gentle blue of morning. The lake lay calm once more, a mirror reflecting hope and renewal. Sarah's breath steadied, her heart lightened by the knowledge that her brother's spirit was free. But as she turned from the lake's edge, a lingering chill and the faintest whisper warned her, some darkness never truly dies. Mistwood was a village perpetually trapped in the liminal space between dusk and dawn. Thick fog wound through its narrow streets like restless spirits, muffling footsteps and swallowing sounds whole. The ancient cobblestones beneath the weary souls of villagers had borne witness to centuries of whispered tales, stories of disappearances, hauntings, and a darkness that dwelled just beyond the flickering glow of lantern light. The Silver Hearth Inn stood at the village's edge, a refuge of fading warmth and shadowed corners. Its wooden beams creaked with age, and the hearth's fire sputtered weakly, casting long, wavering shadows against the walls. The patrons spoke in low murmurs, their eyes darting to the windows where the fog pressed close like an unseen watcher. Eliza Harper had returned to Mistwood after nearly a decade away, summoned by the unsettling news that her childhood friend, Thomas, had vanished without a trace. The police had offered no answers, and the villagers spoke only in cryptic half-truths and fearful glances. As evening bled into night, Eliza prepared herself with a lantern, an heirloom passed down through generations, said to hold protective power against the unseen. Its flame burned steady, a fragile beacon in the ever-thickening fog. Stepping out into the chill, Eliza felt the weight of the villagers' gaze upon her back. The path to the forest was familiar, yet transformed, shadows deeper and the silence more profound. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their twisted branches woven into an impenetrable canopy that swallowed the moonlight. The lantern's glow cast dancing patterns on the damp earth, illuminating the roots that snaked beneath the forest floor and ancient runes etched into the gnarled bark of towering oaks. The symbols pulsed faintly, as though breathing with a life of their own, and a soft hum seemed to vibrate through the air, a song older than time. Eliza's heart pounded, a mixture of dread and determination fueling her steps. The forest whispered secrets in a language half forgotten, its voice a tantalizing riddle woven with shadows and light. Then, from the fog, a figure emerged, cloaked in darkness, his face obscured beneath a hood. In his hand, he held a lantern whose flame burned unnaturally bright, its pale light cutting through the mist with an almost spectral clarity. "Why do you come here, Eliza?" The stranger's voice was smooth, chillingly calm, each word deliberate. Eliza swallowed her fear, steadying her voice. "I seek the truth about Thomas. He disappeared, and no one will tell me what happened." The man's smile was a crescent of shadow, unsettling in its silence. "Truth is a lantern," he murmured, "both a guide and a curse. It reveals what lies hidden, but the light can consume." The air grew colder, the fog swirling thickly as the forest seemed to hold its breath. Eliza lifted her lantern higher, its flame flickering bravely against the encroaching darkness. "Will you walk with me?" the stranger asked, stepping forward, his lantern's glow mingling with hers. Eliza hesitated only a moment before following, each step drawing her deeper into the forest's enigmatic heart, a place where reality bent and the line between light and shadow blurred. Eliza followed the stranger through the mist-cloaked forest, the flickering flames of their lanterns casting long shadows that danced between the twisted trunks. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the forest itself exhaled a breath steeped in ancient sorrow. Every step seemed to echo with secrets, footsteps from long ago that never truly faded. The stranger's voice was low and steady, weaving tales of the forest's dark past, stories of lost souls trapped between worlds, cursed to wander beneath the lantern's glow. He spoke of Thomas, of how the boy had ventured too far, lured by a light that promised salvation but delivered despair. Eliza's heart pounded as the path narrowed, twisting through thick brambles and gnarled roots. The forest floor was carpeted with fallen leaves, their rustle amplified in the oppressive silence. The faint glow of their lanterns barely penetrated the swirling fog, revealing glimpses of shadowy figures watching from the edges. Suddenly, the stranger stopped before a clearing bathed in an unnatural silver light. At its center stood an ancient stone pedestal, its surface etched with symbols that pulsed with faint energy. Upon it lay a lantern, its flame flickering wildly despite the absence of wind. "This," the stranger said, "is the lantern of lost souls. It holds the power to guide the departed, but it also binds them to this realm." Eliza reached out, fingers trembling as she touched the cold stone. A wave of sorrow and desperation washed over her, whispers flooding her mind, voices pleading for release, for peace. The lantern's flame blazed bright, illuminating a spectral figure, Thomas. His eyes, once filled with life, were now hollow, trapped between worlds.
Thomas?
Eliza whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. The spirit reached out, a silent plea etched in the wavering light. Eliza knew then that to save him, she must confront the darkness that bound the lantern and risk losing herself in the process. As shadows converged, the forest seemed to close in, the lantern's glow flickering like a heartbeat in the encroaching gloom. The true test had begun. Nestled among the mist-shrouded hills, the ruins of St. Maro's Church stood as a solemn testament to a forgotten era. Its stone walls, once proud and towering, now crumbled and cloaked in ivy, bore the scars of time and tragedy. The village of Hollow's End, perched just beyond the fog, held the church in wary reverence, speaking of it only in hushed tones and cautious glances. Claire Donovan arrived at Hollow's End under a slate-grey sky, her boots crunching softly against the gravel path that wound toward the church. As a historian specializing in lost faiths and ancient curses, Claire had long been drawn to places like St. Maro's, sites steeped in mystery, where the line between history and legend blurred into shadow. The air was heavy with a damp chill, the scent of moss and decaying leaves mingling with the faint, lingering aroma of burnt candles and incense. The village itself seemed caught in time, its narrow streets empty save for the occasional shuttered window or the soft murmur of distant voices. Claire paused at the edge of the church grounds, her gaze lifting to the crumbling archway adorned with faded carvings of saints and angels. The stained glass windows, shattered and jagged, caught the fading light of the late afternoon, casting fractured rainbows onto the weathered stone floor. As she stepped inside, the silence wrapped around her like a shroud. The wooden pews lay broken and overturned, their once polished surfaces scarred by neglect. The altar, though cracked and worn, still held an aura of reverence, its carved symbols etched with a solemnity that transcended time. Claire's fingers traced the worn stone of the altar, her touch awakening echoes of prayers whispered long ago. Her eyes caught sight of an inscription, half hidden beneath layers of dust and moss, an ancient warning scrawled in a language she recognized as an old dialect of Latin, twisted and warped by age. Her breath caught as she read the words aloud, their meaning both sacred and dreadful. Here lies the covenant broken, the light betrayed. Those who seek salvation shall find only shadows. A shiver ran down her spine, and the heavy wooden door behind her groaned, swinging slightly as a cold draught swept through the sanctuary. From the depths of the ruined church came a faint sound, a low, mournful hymn, sung in voices not her own. Claire turned sharply, heart pounding. The sanctuary seemed to pulse with a life of its own, shadows lengthening and curling like living tendrils. The flicker of a candle's flame appeared, though no source was visible, casting dancing light upon the cracked stone walls. The whispers grew into murmurs, and the murmurs into a chorus, voices rising in a plaintive plea for redemption, weaving through the air like a spectral choir. Claire's resolve hardened. She had come seeking answers, and now, standing amidst the echoes of forgotten faith, she knew that the church's story was far from over. Something ancient stirred within these stones, a curse bound by betrayal and sacrifice, yearning for release. As twilight deepened, the church breathed around her, its walls alive with secrets and sorrow. Claire felt the weight of unseen eyes upon her, the lingering presence of those lost to the shadows. The echoes of St. Maro's church were awakening, and with them a darkness that refused to be silenced. The candlelight flickered uncertainly, casting long, wavering shadows across the broken pews and shattered stained glass. Claire Donovan stood at the heart of the ruined sanctuary, clutching her lantern as the mournful hymn rose and fell like a spectral breath. The voices, ancient and sorrowful, wrapped around her, threading through the cracked stone walls and stained pillars. As she moved deeper into the church, the air grew colder, thick with the weight of untold secrets. Every step echoed against the stone, a hollow reminder that she was trespassing where few dared to tread. Her gaze was drawn to a shadowed alcove near the altar, where a faint glow pulsed rhythmically. Approaching cautiously, Claire found a carved stone slab embedded in the floor, etched with cryptic symbols that seemed to writhe beneath her lantern's light. She traced the symbols with trembling fingers, feeling a sudden surge of energy, like the heartbeat of the church itself. The ground beneath her vibrated faintly, and the whispers crescendoed into a chilling crescendo. Suddenly, spectral figures emerged from the darkness, ghostly forms of the church's long-dead congregation, faces etched with grief and torment. They reached out with translucent hands, their eyes pleading for release from their eternal prison. Claire's breath caught as she realized the truth. The church was a vessel for a curse born of betrayal. Centuries ago, a pact had been broken, damning the faithful to linger in the shadows between worlds. Determined to break the curse, Claire recalled the ancient manuscripts she carried, texts that spoke of a ritual to free the trapped souls. As she prepared the sacred circle, the church seemed to resist, the shadows twisting and writhing in defiance. The spectral choir's voices rose in anguished protest, but Claire's resolve was unyielding. She chanted the incantations, her voice steady despite the oppressive darkness pressing in. A blinding light erupted from the altar, engulfing the church in radiant brilliance. The ghosts cried out, their forms dissolving into streams of light that ascended toward the heavens. As the light faded, silence fell, a profound, sacred quiet that spoke of peace restored. Claire sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. The echoes of the forgotten church had been silenced at last, their song of sorrow transformed into a hymn of redemption. But as she rose to leave, a faint whisper lingered, a promise that some shadows never fully fade, and some echoes remain eternal. Raven's Hill rose sharply against the horizon, its rocky peak crowned by the silhouette of an imposing mansion. From a distance, the house seemed to brood over the small town of Millbrook below, its darkened windows like watchful eyes. The townsfolk kept their distance, their voices hushed when the mansion was mentioned. Stories of madness, disappearance, and curses wove through generations like an unbroken chain, binding the house in infamy. For decades, the mansion had been abandoned, its grand facade peeling and crumbling, the once manicured gardens overtaken by wild thorns and ivy. Windows were boarded, doors sealed with rusted iron locks, and the estate stood silent, a relic of sorrow and forgotten tragedies. When the Harrington family unexpectedly inherited the estate from a distant relative none of them had known well, the opportunity to restore the mansion stirred a mix of excitement and apprehension. Jonathan Harrington, a historian with a passion for unraveling the past's mysteries, saw the estate as a challenge, a chance to uncover truths buried beneath layers of dust and shadow. Arriving under a sky streaked with grey, Jonathan, his wife Margaret, and their bright-eyed daughter Lily approached the mansion. The gravel crunching beneath their feet was the only sound in the heavy stillness. The air carried a faint scent of damp earth and decayed wood, mingling with the distant calls of crows circling the hilltop. As they crossed the threshold, the vast interior greeted them with a chill. The grand foyer, though layered in dust and neglect, still bore the echoes of opulence. Ornate mouldings, towering ceilings, and a grand staircase spiraling into darkness. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the grime-coated windows, casting muted patterns across cracked floorboards. Jonathan felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. The mansion was alive with unseen presence, whispers riding the stale air, shadows flickering just beyond sight. Days were spent exploring the labyrinthine rooms. Jonathan pored over journals and letters discovered in the neglected library, documents that revealed a history steeped in occult practices, family tragedies, and unexplained disappearances. Margaret catalogued relics and artifacts, her unease growing as strange occurrences began to unsettle the household. Lily, with the innocence of childhood, wandered the hallways freely, but she often paused, staring into corners where no one else saw, speaking softly to unseen companions. At night she spoke of a pale figure who watched from the attic window, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. One evening, as twilight bled into night, Jonathan stood by the fireplace, reading a letter penned in hurried script. It told of a ritual meant to bind a restless spirit, a spirit born of grief and vengeance, tethered to the land by blood and betrayal. A sudden chill swept through the room. The flickering flames dimmed, and the house seemed to exhale a sigh heavy with sorrow. Jonathan's heart quickened. The mansion on Raven's Hill was awakening, and its dark secrets were stirring once more. Night fell over Raven's Hill like a velvet shroud, swallowing the mansion in shadows deeper than darkness itself. Inside, the air grew thick with anticipation, as if the very walls held their breath, waiting for some long-delayed moment to unfold. Jonathan sat by the hearth, the flickering flames casting restless shadows that danced across the peeling wallpaper. The journals lay open on the table before him, their fragile pages whispering secrets of a family cursed by ambition and bloodshed. The ritual to bind the restless spirit had been attempted long ago, but something had gone terribly wrong. Margaret paced the grand hall, her footsteps soft on the worn carpet. She had noticed the subtle changes, cold spots that lingered like ghostly hands, soft murmurs in the dead of night, the faintest scent of lilacs, an eerie reminder of a presence unseen but deeply felt. Upstairs, Lily's room was a sanctuary of innocence, but tonight even its walls seemed vulnerable. She pressed her small hands against the window pane, eyes wide as she watched a pale figure standing beyond the glass, eyes glowing faintly with an unearthly light.
"Lily, come away from the window,"
Margaret called softly, but the child did not respond. The figure raised a hand in silent greeting before fading into the mist that curled around the hill. Jonathan's voice broke the silence. We must confront it. Gathering his resolve, he led Margaret and Lily to the attic, the heart of the mansion's mystery. The narrow staircase groaned beneath their weight as they ascended into the darkness, the air growing colder with each step. The attic was a chamber of forgotten memories, dust-covered trunks, faded portraits, and remnants of a life long past. In its center stood a circle of symbols painted in dried blood, a cruel echo of the failed ritual. As Jonathan stepped into the circle, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing their lanterns. Darkness embraced them, alive and hungry. A voice whispered, soft, yet laced with fury and sorrow. "Why do you disturb my rest?" From the shadows, the spirit emerged, a woman draped in spectral light, her eyes burning with a torment that spanned centuries. She reached out, her touch icy, yet filled with a desperate yearning. Jonathan steadied himself, reciting the incantation from the journals. The air crackled with energy as light battled shadow, the mansion itself trembling with the force of their struggle. With a final, anguished wail, the spirit dissolved into a cascade of shimmering light. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a serene silence that filled the mansion's ancient bones. As dawn broke over Raven's Hill, the Harrington family stood together, weary but unbroken. The house's dark secrets had been faced, and for now, laid to rest. But in the quiet corners of the mansion, where shadows still lingered, a faint glow pulsed, a reminder that some darkness never truly fades.